Hi, my name is Donald, and my presentation today is going to be about eco-criticism. Yay! Now we should start off by defining what eco-criticism is. Our teacher has already brought it up throughout this class so far, so it's not really new to us, but from my understanding, it's going to be an emphasis on the destruction of nature to bring attention to the issues of the environment. This is just my simple guess to what it truly means, so I might form new opinions throughout this. We'll see. But the actual Google dictionary definition is going to be this. Eco-criticism is an interdisciplinary field of study that analyzes how the natural world is portrayed in literature, typically in relation to modern and environmental concerns. And surprisingly, this is similar to what our professor has already discussed so far. Now, I think it's time to talk about the history of eco-criticism and how it was developed. The term was first used by this man, William Ruckert, in 1978. But as we learned in class, he wasn't the main one that started the movement. It was her, Rachel Carson, and her book The Silent Spring that started the movement of eco-criticism. I don't think we need to go into further details about the movement and stuff because we already did that in class. But what really matters is that eco-criticism still matters today. And why is it important, you may think? Well, obviously, one of the most important issues today is climate change. So clearly, the environment is something we still care about. And what does eco-criticism bring forth? Brings attention to these modern day problems and shows us what a bad future could look like this wasteland right here. Or it could provide possible good outcomes for our future, like this on the right. And since literature is a very effective form of rhetoric, the messages could get across to many people that might have not cared or known about the current environmental issues. If we were to just ignore and remain ignorant to these environmental issues, our future could look a little something like this. The bad ending. Uh-oh. A world without many people left, overrun by the things we chose to neglect. So remember, to avoid the bad ending, make sure you don't forget about helping out the environment every once in a while. Now I think it's time to talk about the last of its kind. As we can see here, this is the brief overview of the story as a whole. And I'll give you a quick one-sentence summary real quick of it. It basically involves this wizard guy right here. And he is one of the last wizards that exist. And he's hunting the last wild dragon that exists as well. And he does all of this for his crumbling empire. There isn't much more to say about the story because it's very short. However, there are still things that can be seen through an eco-criticism lens. The major one being the defantasizing of a fantasy world. So when you think about fantasy, most common things that come to mind are like probably dragons, mages, dungeons, elves, medieval things, and everything like that. Basically, a world that is magical and mystical compared to our real world. What we see in The Last of Its Kind is it describing the loss of all those mystical and magical things. This mage is one of the last remaining mages that exist, and he's hunting the last female dragon that exists in the wild. So his goal is ultimately to rid all of them of dragons. In the end, he ends up killing the dragon, and he dies soon after in the snow. He also mentions how the mages had already completed a genocide on the elves as well. All of this gives us an image of how fantasy aspects in this world are coming to an end and being destroyed by this empire. To link this idea to the modern day, we have the old Americas that were colonized by the Europeans. Before the Europeans came, the Americas had empires and villages of all people all over. They had some very unique technology, but especially they had very strong culture. Then, when the Europeans came over, the empires started to fall and the villages fell too. And the Europeans started introducing their own culture into the region, completely changing what could have been for the Americas. This case is not as drastic as the last of its kind because native culture still exists today and tribes still exist, of course. But still, there is an overarching message to be learned here. It's that imperialism can be good for the economy and help countries and empires, but in the end, is hurting people and the environment really worth it? Since empires tend to fall and rise, but you can never get back what you completely destroy. And that brings us to the next point. The empire here in the story, their main goal is to get rid of all these fantasy elements that could challenge their power. This ties us back to the idea of eco-criticism and how the empire decided it wanted to control everything, but they are crumbling, so they're basically destroying the world for no reason at all. And I got this little quote here that kind of summarizes that all up. It's, whatever you lose, you'll find it again. In this case being the empire's rising and falling. But what you throw away, you'll never get back. And that's basically talking about how, like, when you destroy a people or the ecosystem, there's a chance you'll just never get that back. Like her in the trash can. Now, the story is very short, so I'm gonna go off topic a little and try and find other examples in other novels in modern day literature. And since we're currently reading Dunes, I thought I might as well bring that up. As we have already read in Dunes, the ecosystem of the desert planet is very fragile. Everything seems to work in harmony, from the Fremen, sandworms, the spices, and the water. However, something that is fragile will easily break, of course. So, the elimination of any of these could have a drastic effect on everything that is on the planet. The sandworms, like right here, are the most dangerous threat on the planet. However, the idea of completely eliminating them hasn't even come up while the Harkonnens were in charge of the planet. So, why would they keep such a deadly thing on the planet? Well, the reason stated earlier is without them, the ecosystem could be put into disarray. In the end, completely wiping out everything that lives on the planet, especially the spices. Now, I want to bring it to a personal modern day example. When I was little, I used to hate mosquitoes. I wish they would get completely eliminated by all the frogs in the world. However, I later learned that if the frogs ate all the mosquitoes, the fish, the birds would all lose their major source of food. And that impact could lead throughout the whole chain, eventually hurting us humans too. It all comes around when it involves ecosystems. Plus, the frogs would get really fat, and you don't really want fat frogs. And then now I kind of ran out of things to talk about from our class, so I wanted to branch out to things outside of it. So recently I watched an anime movie called Weathering with You, which brings an interesting perspective while I looked at it through an eco-criticism lens. I won't talk about the spoilers because the movie's still new, but I'll go over the setting and the plot that involves eco-criticism. Essentially, Tokyo is plagued with an obsessive amount of rain that shows no sign of stopping. It turns out there exists a girl that can stop the rain through certain prayer for a certain amount of time. This girl right there. And then what they do when they find that out is the main character in her begin going around advertising their service to the people of Tokyo to create a perfect sunny day for whatever occasion they needed. And that's the main character, by the way, just so you know. They keep doing this eventually, or they keep doing this, but it eventually becomes a major downside. Because people keep requesting it, but it turns out it makes it rain more when they do that. So there's more to the story, and that's not really the super main plot, but it's the most important part when it involves eco criticism. So to this slide brings attention to the idea how we can take a perfectly sunny day for granted, like this beach day right here. Or especially since we live in Las Vegas, where it never rains, we always have sunny days, so we're good. But more importantly, all of that leads to the idea that human nature towards takes things for granted sometimes, like our water, for example. A lot of people use water wastefully, and I'm very guilty of this. I take long showers, and if we keep up this pattern, would there be major consequences we just don't know yet, like in Weathering with You? Therefore, the significance in looking through Weathering with You with an eco-criticism lens is the idea we take things of nature for granted sometimes, and that itself may have major consequences in the end. And I want to try and make a quick stretch of this eco-criticism lens because after learning about what eco-criticism lens is, I feel like it can kind of be applied to any form of literature and find messages that probably weren't even supposed to be there. So let's take a look at this anime called Tokyo Revengers, for example. Here, the main character, not him, he's not a main character, is able to go back in time as his old self with his current mind and change the previous events of his past. When he goes back to the present, his life is changed based on what he did differently in the past. It's a little confusing, but the idea I came up with isn't as confusing. So, what we can see if we put on an eco-criticism lens here is that even though we're just one person, we still have the power to change what happens in the future around us. Through the simple actions we do today, we can completely change what could be a bad ending like that sign into a very good one. Of course, we don't have the time travel and foresight to look at them like that, but if you put effort towards a better future, you can change everything and make it a great day or a great future. Discovering that I could use an eco-critical lens on something as random as anime, not involving nature, interested me a little bit. I wonder how many different lenses exist, and more importantly, I wonder how many messages are intentional throughout works of fiction. Because if there is an unlimited number of lenses, then would it be impossible for the author to consider them all? So perhaps the power of storytelling is just that powerful. That it can just represent an infinite amount of messages. And if that's the case, then is this separation between a good book and a great one just based off how many different obvious messages it conveys? I don't know. It's just some food for thought. So then that leads us to the conclusion. And overall, looking at things through an eco-criticism lens can be an enlightening experience. It's kind of enlightening for me because I didn't really think you could come up with any message from any literature. But while making this presentation, I realized a little more about what it actually means like that. I think you can apply eco-criticism lens to anything and try and find a message from it. Sometimes, probably most things, there's not really a message to be found, but still looking through it can give you ideas you never thought of, like the Tokyo Revengers example. Even though it's a bit of a stretch, the message is still the same. Now, I've been wondering if I could apply any type of lens to any fiction. Like, if I could apply a love lens to like a random show and then come up with a new perspective from that I never thought of. But that's just an idea. And I'm kind of glad I did the project on lenses, because if I ever get bored of my favorite TV show, game, movie, I can just try and looking at it through a new lens, and maybe I can find a new perspective I never knew existed. And that's my presentation. Thank you for listening. Bye.